"Excuse me, flight attendant. This woman is in the wrong seat and she's refusing to move." The entire first-class cabin went still. Diane didn't stand, didn't raise her voice. She just set down her book and folded her hands in her lap, the way she'd learned to do in rooms where one wrong move could end your career. The woman, blonde, mid-40s, designer carry-on at her feet, looked at the flight attendant like she expected immediate action, like she'd done this before and won. But what she didn't know was that Diane Carter had spent 23 years in federal security, currently directed operations for 3 major airports, and had security clearance that would make most people's heads spin. The flight attendant appeared, young, maybe 25, with the practiced smile of someone who dealt with difficult passengers before. Her name tag read Ashley. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" The woman in 3B, who Diane would later learn was named Catherine Brennan, gestured toward Diane with a manicured hand. "Yes, she's sitting in first class and I don't think that's appropriate. Can you check her boarding pass?" Ashley's smile flickered. "Ma'am, if there's a seating issue, I'm sure we can." "I'd like you to check now, please." Diane was dressed simply, black slacks, a cream blouse, a blazer, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed authority or wealth, just a woman traveling home after a long week of security briefings in Atlanta. She reached into her bag and pulled out her boarding pass without being asked. Handed it to Ashley calmly. Ashley scanned it, glanced at the seat number, then back at Catherine. "She's in the correct seat, ma'am. 2A purchased and confirmed." "That can't be right," Catherine said. "First-class tickets are expensive. Are you sure this isn't some kind of mistake? Maybe an upgrade error?" The implication hung in the air. Diane had heard it before, the unspoken question. How could she afford this? Ashley's professional mask slipped just slightly. "Ma'am, I can assure you the passenger is in her assigned seat." But did she actually pay for it, or was it some kind of, I don't know, charity situation? "That's not information I'm authorized to share, and frankly, ma'am, it's not relevant." Catherine's face flushed. "I'm a platinum member of this airline. I've been flying first class for 15 years, and I'm telling you something feels off here." Diane finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, measured, the voice she used in briefings when someone was about to make a career-ending mistake. "Is there something about my appearance that makes you believe I don't belong here?" Catherine blinked. "I didn't say that." "You implied it." "I'm just asking reasonable questions." "No," Diane said evenly. "You're making assumptions based on how I look, and you're doing it loud enough that everyone in this cabin can hear you." Catherine's jaw tightened. "I have a right to feel comfortable on a flight." Comfortable with what exactly? A woman sitting quietly reading a book. With knowing that everyone in first class earned their seat legitimately. And you've decided I haven't. "I just think the airline should verify." "They did verify, you watched them verify, and you still don't believe it." This is where things shifted. Ashley stepped between them, her voice firm now. "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and return to your seat." "I will not," Catherine said. "Not until someone with actual authority addresses this situation. For all we know, she could have used a stolen credit card. I've read articles about this happening." The cabin had gone completely silent now. A businessman across the aisle pulled off his headphones, frowning. An older couple, too, rose back, exchanged glances. Diane remained perfectly still. She'd been underestimated her entire career. By colleagues who assumed she was a secretary, by contractors who asked to speak to her supervisor, by visitors to her office who didn't believe she was the director until they saw her name on the door. This was just one more version of the same story. But it still stung. Ashley's hand moved toward her communication device. "Ma'am, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to call the captain." "Good, call her. I want someone with real authority to handle this. The captain is male, Ashley said coolly, and he'll tell you exactly what I'm telling you. This passenger has every right to be here. Then I want security waiting when we land. I want her background checked properly. Diane spoke again, her voice still calm. If you'd like to call security, go ahead. I have nothing to hide. Catherine looked vindicated. Fine, because when they run your information, we'll see if you're really supposed to be here. Security won't run my information, Diane said quietly. They'll recognize me immediately. Oh, so now you're somebody important. Catherine's voice dripped with sarcasm. I didn't say that. You implied it. Diane allowed herself a small smile. I suppose I did. Who are you then? Some kind of celebrity I'm supposed to recognize? No, just someone who works in airport security. The businessman across the aisle spoke up. Ma'am, you need to let this go. You're harassing this woman over nothing. I'm protecting everyone on this flight, Catherine snapped. From what? A woman reading a novel. Another passenger, a woman in her 60s, leaned forward. I've been watching this whole thing. You haven't questioned anyone else's ticket, just hers. We all know why. Catherine's face went crimson. This is unbelievable. I'm being attacked for asking reasonable questions. There's nothing reasonable about profiling someone based on their skin color, the older woman said firmly. But that wasn't the moment that mattered most. Ashley made a decision. I'm calling the captain. And yes, we'll have security meet us on arrival, but I want to be clear, they'll be addressing your behavior, not hers. Catherine stood up. You can't do that. I'm the one who made the complaint. And your complaint is discriminatory and baseless. So yes, I absolutely can. Ashley disappeared toward the cockpit. Diane sat very still. She pulled out her phone and quietly started recording audio, not video, just sound. She'd learned long ago to document everything. In her line of work, documentation was the difference between accountability and he said, she said. Catherine had her phone out too, typing furiously. Diane knew what she was doing, getting her version of events out first, probably posting to social media about being victimized by an aggressive passenger and an unfair airline. It was predictable. And it wouldn't matter. 2 minutes later, a voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. I've been made aware of a disturbance in the first-class cabin. Let me be absolutely clear. All passengers on this aircraft have been properly verified and have every right to be here. Any further disruptions will result in law enforcement involvement upon landing. Thank you. The message was diplomatic, but everyone knew who it was directed at. Catherine's hands were shaking now. The businessman across the aisle nodded at Diane with quiet solidarity. The older woman who'd spoken up leaned forward. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, honey. Thank you, Diane said quietly. I hope they throw the book at her. I hope she learns from it, Diane replied. That would be more useful. What she didn't realize yet was that the learning was about to be very public. For the next 90 minutes, the tension in the cabin was thick. Catherine sat rigid in her seat, occasionally glancing at Diane with a mixture of anger and something that might have been doubt starting to creep in. Diane went back to her book. Or tried to. Her mind kept circling back to the encounter, to how many times she'd had to prove she belonged in spaces others took for granted, to the exhaustion of being constantly questioned. She thought about her niece, 16, brilliant, passionate about criminal justice, and wondered how many times she'd faced this in her life. She thought about the young black TSA officer she'd mentored last month, who'd confided that passengers regularly asked for her supervisor because they didn't believe she had authority. She thought about what she'd say to Catherine when security arrived. If she'd say anything at all. Ashley checked on her twice. Can I get you anything, Ms. Carter? The use of her name was deliberate, respectful. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm really sorry about what happened." "You handled it well. Don't apologize for someone else's behavior." Ashley nodded and moved on. 20 minutes before landing, the captain's voice returned. "Flight attendants, prepare for arrival." Diane felt the shift in altitude, felt the plane begin its descent into Reagan National Airport, and felt the weight of what was coming. This next decision would change how this ended. The plane landed smoothly. The seatbelt sign turned off. Passengers began gathering their belongings, the usual shuffle and rustle of people eager to deplane. But Ashley's voice cut through the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a brief delay before deplaning." Groans rippled through the cabin. Catherine looked pale now, her earlier confidence evaporating. 2 minutes later, the aircraft door opened, and 2 airport security officers stepped on board. One was a black man in his 50s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen everything. The other was younger, Hispanic, alert and professional. The older officer spoke. "We're looking for the passenger who requested security intervention." Ashley pointed, "Seat 3B." Catherine raised her hand slightly. "That's me. I called because this woman." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, we'll get to that. First, we need to speak with the passenger you made the complaint about." He looked at Diane and stopped mid-step. His eyes widened. "Director Carter." The cabin went completely silent. Diane stood calmly. "Hello, James." The officer's entire demeanor changed. He straightened to attention and saluted. "Ma'am, I didn't know you were on this flight." The younger officer's eyes went wide, and he immediately followed suit with his own salute. Diane nodded acknowledgement. "At ease. It's good to see you, Officer Wright." Wright lowered his hand, but his posture remained respectful. "Director, there was a complaint filed about you." "There was." Wright turned slowly to Catherine, and his expression had gone from professional to cold. "Ma'am, you called security on Director Diane Carter, the Federal Security Director for Reagan National, Dulles, and BWI airports. Is that correct?" Catherine's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I didn't. She didn't say she was." "She shouldn't have had to," Wright said, his voice hard. "You made assumptions about a passenger based on her appearance and then demanded she be investigated." "I was just trying to make sure everyone was safe." "Safe from the woman who oversees all security operations for 3 major airports. The woman who coordinates with TSA, FBI, and Homeland Security. The woman who literally trains people like me." Catherine had gone white as paper. The younger officer spoke up, his voice respectful but firm. "Ma'am, Director Carter has federal security clearance at the highest levels. She's briefed members of Congress. She's one of the most respected professionals in airport security in the country." He looked at Catherine. "And you thought she stole a first-class ticket." What happened next wasn't loud, but it was decisive. Wright pulled out a notepad. "Director Carter, I need your statement about what occurred." Diane gave it, calmly, factually, without embellishment. She described Catherine's initial complaint, the accusation that she didn't belong, the demand for verification, the implication of fraud. Wright took notes, his jaw getting tighter with each detail. Then he turned to Ashley. "Flight attendant, your account." Ashley corroborated everything, adding Catherine's tone, her refusal to back down, her explicit statements about checking backgrounds. Wright looked at Catherine. "Ma'am, do you dispute any of this?" I had concerns. I didn't know who she was." "That's exactly the problem," Wright said. "You didn't know who she was, but you assumed she didn't belong in first class. Based on what?" Catherine couldn't answer. Wright closed his notepad. "Here's what's happening. I'm filing a detailed incident report with the airline and with airport administration. This will be on record. The airline will determine any travel restrictions. That's their jurisdiction. But I'm also noting that you made a complaint that wasted federal security resources and caused distress to a high-ranking federal official. I didn't mean. Intent doesn't erase impact, ma'am. He turned back to Diane. Director, do you wish to file a formal complaint? You'd be well within your rights. Diane considered. She thought about the easy path, letting the system punish Catherine, walking away with her authority validated. But she thought about her niece, about the young TSA officer, about the kind of change that actually mattered. No formal complaint, Diane said, but I want this incident fully documented, and I want a copy of the report sent to my office. You'll have it by tomorrow morning, ma'am. Diane looked at Catherine. I hope you think about this. Really think about why you assumed I didn't belong here. Because the next person you make assumptions about might not have the authority I have, and they'll still deserve to be treated with basic respect. Catherine looked down at her hands, unable to meet Diane's eyes. Wright gestured toward the exit. Director, you're free to deplane. We'll handle the rest. Thank you, Officer Wright. No, ma'am, thank you for everything you do for us. As Diane gathered her bag, Wright and the younger officer stood at attention until she passed. Behind her she heard Wright's voice, low and firm, addressing Catherine. Ma'am, you're going to remain seated until every other passenger has deplaned. Then we're going to have a much longer conversation. Diane didn't look back. This was where things had shifted, but the shift wasn't finished yet. Diane made it 20 feet into the terminal before she had to stop. She found a quiet corner near a window and sat down, her legs suddenly unsteady. The adrenaline was wearing off. In its place came exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that followed every encounter like this. The weight of having to be perfect, composed, unshakable when someone else got to be careless with their assumptions. She pulled out her phone. 12 missed calls. 9 texts. Word had traveled fast. Someone must have already posted about the security salute. 1 text from her deputy, Boss, are you okay? Heard what happened. 1 from her sister, please tell me you're all right, call me. 1 from her mentor, retired FBI, handled it like a pro, I'm sure, but call me anyway. Diane sent quick replies to each, assuring them she was fine. But she wasn't entirely sure that was true. She was tired. Tired of being the example. Tired of turning teachable moments out of situations that should never have happened. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Excuse me, Ms. Carter. She looked up. It was the older woman from the plane, the one who'd spoken up. I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. That was quite a lot. I'm managing, but thank you. May I sit? Diane gestured to the chair beside her. The woman sat, setting down her carry-on with a sigh. My name is Helen Crawford, and I need to tell you something. Diane waited. I worked at State Department for 30 years, and I saw what you just went through happen to colleagues more times than I can count. Brilliant people, top of their fields, treated like they didn't belong in meetings they were running. She looked at Diane directly. What you did back there, staying calm, not giving her ammunition to claim you were aggressive, that took strength most people don't have. It shouldn't take strength, Diane said quietly. It should just be a normal flight. You're right, it should be. But until the world catches up, I want you to know your dignity in that moment mattered. People were watching, learning. Helen stood, picked up her bag. I hope the rest of your day is peaceful. She walked away, leaving Diane with a strange mix of emotions. Validation, exhaustion, and a small seed of hope. But the story wasn't over yet. Diane made it to her car in long-term parking before her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized, the airline's corporate office. She answered, Diane Carter. Director Carter, this is Margaret Lawson, Vice President of Customer Relations. I'm calling to personally apologize for what you experienced on Flight 2847. I appreciate that. We've reviewed the incident report from our crew and from airport security. What happened was completely unacceptable. Yes, it was. The passenger in question is being placed on our no-fly list pending a full review, and we're examining our protocols for handling discriminatory complaints. That's a start, Diane said, but I need you to understand something. Your flight attendant did everything right. She shut down the complaint, called the captain, requested security. The problem wasn't your staff. It was that the complaint was entertained at all before being immediately dismissed as baseless. What do you suggest? Train your people to recognize when a complaint is rooted in bias rather than safety. Teach them that asking a black woman to prove she paid for her seat when you haven't asked anyone else is discrimination, not diligence. Silence on the other end. Then, you're right. Would you be willing to consult with us on updating our training? Diane hadn't expected that. Send me a proposal, I'll review it. Thank you, Director, and again, I'm deeply sorry. After hanging up, Diane sat in her car for a long moment. She could have just accepted the apology and moved on. But she'd spent 23 years in security because she believed in prevention, not just reaction. This was a chance to prevent the next black woman from experiencing what she had. She couldn't pass that up. By the time Diane got home, the story had made news. Not national, not yet, but local outlets had picked it up. Federal Security Director racially profiled on flight. Airport security salutes boss after passenger, calls them to remove her. Airline apologizes after passenger questions black director's first-class ticket. Diane's phone kept buzzing. Interview requests. Statements from colleagues expressing outrage and support. Messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. And one message that caught her attention. It was from a young woman named Tamara Washington, a TSA officer Diane had mentored 2 years ago. Director Carter, I saw what happened. I'm so sorry you went through that. But I also need to tell you, seeing how you handled it gave me courage. Last week, a passenger demanded to speak to my supervisor because she didn't believe I could authorize her through security. I was going to let it go, but I remembered your training. Document, stay professional, don't accept disrespect as normal. I calmly explained my authority. When she persisted, I called my supervisor, who backed me up immediately. The passenger was embarrassed. I was validated. Thank you for showing us how to stand our ground with dignity. Tamara. Diane read it twice, feeling something warm settle in her chest. This was why it mattered. Not the news coverage. Not the apology. But the young woman who learned she didn't have to shrink to make others comfortable. 2 weeks later, Diane sat in a conference room at the airline's headquarters. Around the table, the VP of Customer Relations, the head of training, 2 diversity consultants, and the union representative for flight attendants. Director Carter, thank you for making time for this, Margaret Lawson began. Diane nodded. We've drafted a new protocol for handling passenger complaints. We'd like your input. They walked her through it. New training on implicit bias for all customer-facing staff. A requirement that complaints about passengers not belonging must be substantiated with actual safety concerns, not assumptions. Clear language that racial profiling will not be tolerated and will result in removal of the complaining passenger, not the target. Mandatory intervention by supervisors before any passenger is questioned about their right to be in their seat. This is strong, Diane said, but training only works if there's accountability. What happens when someone violates the protocol? Immediate suspension pending investigation, said the training director. And if bias is confirmed, termination. What about the passengers who make false complaints? Banned from the airline, no exceptions. Diane leaned back. I'm impressed. This is more comprehensive than I expected. We're taking this seriously, Margaret said. What happened to you was inexcusable, and we know it's not an isolated incident. We want to be better. Then make sure your flight attendants know they'll be supported when they shut down discriminatory behavior. That's where it usually fails. Staff are afraid of complaints, so they default to appeasing the aggressor instead of protecting the target. We'll make that explicit in the training, the union rep said. Our people need to know we have their backs when they do the right thing. They talked for 2 hours. At the end, Margaret asked, would you be willing to speak at our annual training conference? Share your experience. Help our people understand what these moments look like from the passenger's perspective. Diane hesitated. She'd spent her career behind the scenes, not in front of cameras. But then she thought about Tamara, about the young TSA officer who needed to see someone who looked like her in a position of authority, about all the flight attendants who probably wanted to do better but didn't know how. Yes, she said, I'll do it. 3 weeks after the incident, Diane received a letter. It was handwritten, postmarked from Virginia. The return address had no name. She opened it carefully. Director Carter. You don't know me, but I was the passenger in 3B Catherine Brennan. I've started this letter 24 times, and I still don't know how to say what needs to be said. I was wrong, completely, inexcusably wrong. I've spent the last 3 weeks in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did, why I looked at you and immediately assumed you didn't belong, why I couldn't just accept the flight attendant's confirmation, why I escalated instead of backing down. The answer is uncomfortable. I have biases I didn't want to admit. I grew up in spaces where everyone looked like me, and I internalized the idea that certain spaces were ours and certain people were outsiders. I never thought of myself as racist. I have black colleagues. I vote for progressive candidates. I consider myself open-minded. But when I saw you in that first-class seat, my first thought wasn't fellow passenger. It was doesn't belong. And I acted on that thought without questioning it. I humiliated you. I wasted security resources. I made a fool of myself. And worst of all, I reinforced a system that makes people like you have to prove yourselves over and over. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I'm writing to tell you I'm doing the work. I've enrolled in anti-racism training. I'm reading books I should have read years ago. I'm having uncomfortable conversations with family and friends. I'm changing or trying to. I don't know if that matters to you, but I wanted you to know. Catherine Brennan. Diane read the letter 3 times. She felt anger still always at what Catherine had done. But she also felt something unexpected, cautious hope. Because the system didn't change unless individuals changed. And individual change didn't happen unless people were willing to look at themselves honestly. She didn't write back immediately. She sat with it for a week. Then she wrote, Catherine, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your honesty. You're right, you were wrong, and the harm you caused isn't erased by remorse. But the fact that you're doing the work, real work, not performative work, that matters. I can't give you absolution. That's not mine to give. But I can tell you this, keep going. Sit with the discomfort. Don't let guilt paralyze you into inaction. Let it motivate you to be better. The world needs fewer people who claim they're not racist and more people who actively work to dismantle racism, in themselves and in the systems around them. Be one of those people. Diane Carter. She scented and felt a small weight lift. 4 months after the incident, Diane stood backstage at the airline's national training conference. 3,000 employees, flight attendants, gate agents, customer service representatives filled the auditorium. She'd spoken to Congress. She'd briefed cabinet members. She'd presented at international security conferences. But this felt different, more personal, more vulnerable. The MC introduced her. Please welcome Director Diane Carter, Federal Security Director, and the woman who reminded us all why our work matters. Diane walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. She waited for it to quiet. Then she began. 4 months ago, I boarded a flight in Atlanta heading home to D.C. I was dressed casually. I had a book, a coffee, and a seat I'd paid for in first class. Within minutes of sitting down, another passenger decided I didn't belong there. She told the story, not with anger, with clarity. Described Catherine's assumptions, Ashley's professionalism, the moment security arrived and recognized her. Here's what I want you to understand, Diane said. That woman didn't question me because I was being suspicious. I was reading a novel. She questioned me because her bias told her that a black woman in first class must be a mistake. And in that moment I had a choice. I could get angry, and I was angry. I could demand to speak to a manager. I could make a scene. But I've learned something in 23 years of working in security. The person who stays calm controls the outcome. So I stayed calm. I provided what was asked. I documented everything. And when security arrived, my credibility spoke for itself. She paused. But here's what haunts me. I shouldn't have needed that credibility. My title shouldn't have been necessary to be treated with basic respect. The fact that I'm a federal director shouldn't be the reason people believe I can afford a first-class ticket. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they're a director or a teacher or a student or unemployed, whether they're in first class or the last row of economy. Your job isn't to judge who looks like they belong somewhere. Your job is to keep people safe and treat them with respect. And when a passenger makes a complaint based on bias rather than behavior, your job is to shut it down, immediately, firmly, without apology. The room was silent. That flight attendant, Ashley, did everything right. She verified my ticket. She refused to escalate based on unfounded assumptions. She called the captain and requested security to address the actual problem, which was the passenger making false accusations. She protected me when she didn't even know who I was. That's the standard. That's what I'm asking all of you to do. The applause started before she finished her sentence. It went on for 2 full minutes. 6 months after the incident, the airline published its annual diversity and inclusion report. Complaints of racial bias, down 58%. Passenger satisfaction among travelers of color, up 34%. Employee confidence in handling discriminatory situations, up 71%. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. The whole story was in the emails Diane received. From a flight attendant who'd shut down a passenger, demanding a Muslim woman remove her hijab in flight. From a gate agent who'd refused to move a disabled passenger just because another passenger felt uncomfortable. From a pilot who'd personally addressed a complaint about a same-sex couple showing affection. From passengers who said they'd witnessed crew members standing up for others and felt safer because of it. These were the changes that mattered. Quiet, incremental, real. 1 year to the day after the incident, Diane boarded a flight. Same airline, same route. She settled into her first-class seat, 2A again, wearing jeans and a sweater, carrying a book and her usual coffee. The flight attendant appeared. "Good morning, welcome aboard." No recognition, no special treatment. Just standard professional courtesy. Exactly as it should be. The flight was uneventful. No one questioned her right to be there. No one asked for extra verification. No one assumed she was in the wrong seat. She read her book in peace. And when the plane landed, she deplaned like any other passenger, anonymous, unremarkable, unmolested. It felt normal. And normal, Diane realized, was revolutionary. Diane Carter never wanted to be known for being racially profiled. She wanted to be known for her work, for making airports safer, for training the next generation of security professionals, for the quiet competence she'd built over 2 decades. But she learned something in the year after that flight. Sometimes the moment chooses you. And what matters is what you do with it. She could have stayed silent, could have accepted the apology and moved on, could have let the airline handle it internally without her involvement. But she didn't. She demanded accountability. She insisted on real change. She turned a humiliating experience into a catalyst for systemic improvement. Not by shouting, not by seeking revenge, but by staying calm, leveraging her authority strategically, and refusing to let people in power off the hook. That security officer's salute had validated her. But the real validation came later. In the training programs that changed. In the policies that were rewritten. In the passengers who flew without being questioned. In the young black professionals who saw someone who looked like them commanding respect. That was the legacy that mattered. Not the viral moment, though it sparked conversation. Not the news coverage, though it raised awareness. But the quiet, persistent work that came after. The meetings. The consultations. The training sessions. The refusal to let promises become empty words. That's what changed things. 2 years after the incident, Diane was promoted to Regional Director of Airport Security, overseeing 7 major airports across the Mid-Atlantic. At her swearing-in ceremony, surrounded by colleagues, federal partners, and family, she thought about that flight. About Catherine's assumptions. About Ashley's professionalism. About Officer Wright's salute. About the choice she'd made to stay calm when she wanted to scream. And about what it had become. She thought about her niece, now 18, who'd just been accepted to the FBI Training Academy. "You inspired me, Aunt Dee," she'd said, "watching how you handled that situation, not with anger but with strategy. That's the kind of agent I want to be." That was worth everything. In her acceptance speech, Diane said something she'd been thinking about for months. Dignity isn't something you beg for, it's something you claim. But claiming it doesn't mean being loud. It doesn't mean being perfect. It means knowing your worth, regardless of whether others recognize it, and refusing to negotiate it away for someone else's comfort. She looked out at the audience. "When I was questioned on that flight, I had 2 choices: react emotionally or respond strategically. I chose strategy. Not because I wasn't angry, I was furious, but because I knew that staying calm gave me power. The power to document what happened. The power to force accountability. The power to turn a degrading moment into meaningful change. That's what I want everyone in this room to remember. Your response matters more than the offense. Your dignity can't be taken, it can only be surrendered. And your voice, used wisely, can change systems." The applause was long and sincere. But the moment Diane treasured most came afterward. A young black woman in a TSA uniform approached her, couldn't have been more than 25. "Director Carter, I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For showing us it's possible to be professional and powerful, to demand respect without apologizing for it, to change things without destroying yourself in the process." The young woman's eyes shone. I'm one of the officers you trained last year. And every time I'm in a situation where someone's trying to diminish me, I think, what would Director Carter do? Diane pulled her into a hug. You don't need to be me, be yourself. But know that your presence matters, your voice matters, and you belong in every room you enter. Yes, ma'am. As Diane watched her walk away, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because every battle was won, but because the work was continuing. The ripples were spreading. The system was bending. And the next generation was watching, learning, believing it was possible. They called security to remove her. Security saluted her instead. And in that moment, Catherine Brennan learned what Diane Carter had always known. Authority doesn't require announcement. Competence doesn't require validation. And dignity doesn't require permission. Diane didn't raise her voice that day. Didn't demand recognition. Didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She just was. And when security arrived, they already knew. That's the power Catherine had missed. That's the lesson she had to learn the hard way. That's the truth Diane had been carrying for 23 years. Your assumptions about who belongs where say everything about you and nothing about them. And when you call security on someone who is security, you don't expose their fraud. You expose your own bias. Diane Carter didn't need that salute to know who she was. But it reminded everyone watching that excellence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits quietly in 2A, reading a book, waiting for the world to catch up. You don't need a title to deserve respect. But when you have one, and someone still doesn't see you, that says everything about them. Stay calm, document truth, know your worth. And when the moment reveals who you are, let it speak for itself. That's not revenge. That's dignity. Quiet, unshakable, transformative dignity.